Pauline, Victor's kid sister, had a best friend named Marianne who frequently dropped by to hang out. Although there was quite a gap in age between Victor and the girls, they rarely exchanged more than a few words. Victor would usually crack jokes and poke fun, leaving the girls giggling but also thinking he was a bit of a lightweight. But on Pauline's birthday, out at the dacha, something unexpected sparked between Victor and Marianne. With the parents out of the picture, the day felt light and unburdened, summer at its freest. As the party buzzed around them, Victor and Marianne slipped away to the quiet banks of the river, escaping the noise and the crowd. There, something shifted. Marianne opened up in a way she never had before. She spoke with warmth and enthusiasm, sharing her wide array of interests, and Victor, almost without realizing it, began to fall for her. When they returned hand in hand, their friends were stunned by this sudden connection. Despite the surprise in Marianne being just 18, they soon decided to get married, a decision that hit her parents like a thunderclap. They'd hoped she'd focus on her studies, not rush into matrimony. But the couple stood their ground, and by July, with school diplomas fresh in hand, they said their vows and made it official. Her parents, faced with the reality of it, had no choice but to accept. As newlyweds, Marianne and Victor began dreaming of a place to call their own. For their first anniversary, they gifted themselves a modest apartment, bought with the help of a loan. With love and effort, they turned it into a warm, inviting little home, the beginning of their new chapter. Victor would often tease Marianne about how glued she was to her phone. Whether she was cooking, cleaning, or even in the bathroom, that phone was practically attached to her hand. She'd feign offense at his jokes, playing along with a smirk. Every now and then, Victor would manage to swipe her phone and stash it high up on a shelf, just out of reach. It never failed to rile her up. Still, their bond remained strong. They often hosted cozy get-togethers with friends, enjoying evenings filled with laughter and chatter. Victor's attachment to Marianne ran deep, borderline possessive even. He hated being apart from her, not even around his own sister. One evening, Marianne came home visibly drained after a rough day at work. Without a word, she went straight for the shower, trying to rinse off the stress of the day. Meanwhile, Victor offered to whip up something for dinner. That's when he noticed something odd. Her phone was lying on the kitchen table. That never happened. Usually, it was glued to her. It must have been a really rough day. The sight of it brought a grin to Victor's face. As he walked past, the screen lit up with a stream of incoming messages. His curiosity, perhaps a bit too strong, got the better of him. He stole a quick glance and froze. The name Myron appeared at the top of the screen, along with a string of messages that made Victor's stomach turn. The man was sending words so intimate, so raw, that even after 7 years of marriage, Victor himself had never dared to speak them aloud. He glanced toward the bathroom. The water was still running. She'd be out soon. Heart pounding, Victor scrolled through more of the conversation. The sender wasn't just any stranger. He recognized Myron from a photo. Marianne's childhood friend. Her mother had mentioned him once, offhandedly. Victor hadn't thought much of it then, but now it all made sense. This wasn't just a friendship. The man had sent her love notes and personal photos, clearly meant to stay private. And Marianne, to his dismay, had responded in kind. She hadn't held back. His hand tightened around the phone so fiercely it hurt. A storm of betrayal rose in him, sharp and sudden. At that moment, revenge wasn't just a thought. It became a burning plan. Victor snapped a quick photo of the chat on the screen, every damning message, every detail, and quietly sent it to himself. Marianne, blissfully unaware that her phone had been tampered with, stepped out of the shower, just as Victor sat there, stewing in thoughts about how to hit the unfaithful woman where it would hurt the most. 2 weeks later, it was Mary's birthday. Her husband had promised her a surprise. What she didn't know was that behind the scenes, he'd been plotting. With the help of her mother, he'd arranged for Myron to show up at the party. Everything else, Victor would handle it personally. He booked a cozy little cafe and had his wife's chat logs printed and bound like a paperback. Sleek, professional, damning. His plan? Hand out copies to everyone in attendance, parents included. As far as he was concerned, their reactions weren't his problem. The only thing that mattered now was making Marianne pay. And the more the urge for revenge festered, the less room there was in him for empathy. When the big day finally rolled around and guests began trickling into the cafe, Victor kept one eye on the door, counting down to the moment her secret lover would walk in. Then, like clockwork, Myron entered, toting a ridiculously oversized bouquet. Mary stiffened at the sight, her smile faltering into something forced as her old friend walked toward her. "How'd you end up here?" she asked, her voice light but strained, while accepting the flowers. "Your mom said we wanted to surprise you," Myron replied, draping an arm over her shoulder like they were long-lost pals. On the outside, they might have looked harmless, two old friends catching up. But Victor knew better. He knew what they'd said, what they'd shared, the pictures, the messages. Victor's jaw tightened. His mouth went dry. Rage churned low in his stomach, crawling up his throat. He swallowed it down. Everyone eventually took their seats. Marianne was a bundle of nerves, her eyes darting toward Myron every few seconds. Victor saw it all, and instead of getting angry, he found a strange comfort in the knowledge that her world was about to implode. He let her parents raise the first couple of toasts. They beamed with pride, showering their daughter with warm wishes and thanking Victor for such a lovely evening. That praise, it hit him like a sucker punch, guilt, sharp and unexpected. But it didn't slow him down. He'd made up his mind. This was happening. When it was finally his turn to speak, Victor stood and began with a nostalgic smile. He told the story of how he and Marianne had met, spoke of the 7 years they'd spent building a life together. His voice was steady, but the weight of his words hung heavy. Marianne's eyes shimmered with tears, the kind that come from deep, complicated places. And then, without warning, he handed out the books. Silence fell. People flipped through the pages, unsure of what they were seeing. Marianne's mother gasped when her eyes caught one of the images. Her hand flew to her chest, face paling with shock. "What is this?" Marianne's father mumbled, flipping through the pages with a bewildered look. Victor did not flinch. Instead, he pointed directly at Myron and replied coldly, "This is your daughter's personal correspondence with this gentleman. I guess no one thought to mention that cheating is still frowned upon." The room froze. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table like a fog. No one moved. Then Marianne shot up from her seat, snatched a glass of wine, and flung it at Victor without a second thought. "You ruined everything," she shrieked, her voice trembling with rage. "This was supposed to be my birthday, and you turned it into a circus." Victor clenched his fists, every muscle in his body tensed. For a second, he felt the burning urge to retaliate, but he didn't. He held back. She stood there, wild-eyed and furious, barking insults like a cornered animal, lashing out, not because she was right, but because she'd been exposed. Just then, Myron stepped in, gently placing his hands on her shoulders, whispering something meant to soothe her. At the same time, he shot Victor a bold, almost smug stare, as if daring him to react. And Victor did. Without a word, he struck Myron square in the face. The hit was swift and brutal, and Myron crumpled to the floor like a rag doll. Marianne let out a piercing scream and dropped to her knees beside him, panic replacing her fury. The guests swarmed in, gasping, leaning in to help, but Victor was already on the move. He grabbed his jacket from the coat rack and walked out without looking back. The divorce that followed was nothing short of a nightmare. Slow, bitter, and exhausting. Marianne demanded far more than Victor considered fair. At first, he tried to keep things civil, hoping they could part ways like adults. But Marianne refused to let go. Fueled by resentment and pride, she kept calling, provoking arguments, demanding control over every last detail. Victor understood, on some level, that her anger came from a place of deep humiliation. Still, that didn't make it easier to tolerate. She'd been unfaithful, and yet he was the one being punished. Eventually, drained by the relentless back and forth, he gave in. He let her have what she wanted. He packed up and moved into a modest apartment on the far edge of the city, far from the memories, far from her parents, and far from anything that reminded him of that day. But no matter how far he went, the echoes of that life followed. Friends and mutual acquaintances, well-meaning or just curious, kept him informed. Updates trickled in, uninvited and unwelcome. And he was sure she heard about him too. He learned that Marianne and Myron had moved in together shortly after the dust settled. Eventually, they got married. 4 years of what looked like happiness followed, at least from the outside. But then, the cracks began to show. Turns out, Myron had a thing for gambling. Not just the occasional bet, he was deep in it. The debts piled up quickly, and with no way out, Marianne had to take on 2 jobs just to stay afloat. Leaving wasn't something she was willing to do, so instead, she worked harder. She paid off what she could, tried to keep him on the straight and narrow, and held everything together with sheer willpower. Victor heard all this in fragments, pieced together like some tragic puzzle. Sometimes he wondered if he'd handled things differently, if he'd stayed quiet, forgiven her, or simply walked away. Would any of it have changed? Would things have turned out better? But the past doesn't negotiate. What's done is done. Marianne couldn't rewrite her story any more than Victor could rewrite his. All she could do now was make peace with her choices and pray she didn't make another mess of things.